Whatever you grow up in, that becomes your natural environment. The privilege just to be able to think and to ask questions and have the freedom to make mistakes or to explore. My child is really truly my biggest teacher. I'm an old mother, so definitely to think like my child or to think like how children do, I sometimes realize this whole thing of generation gap. You said you're always favoring women. What about men? I'm going to be a man one day. Their exposure is much wider. So I think the biggest challenge for educators and parents is today to align ourselves. Good morning to everyone gathered here. Such a pleasure, Nandita, and honor to have you here with us. I'm going to sort of plunge into the conversation because I think Ms. Asha Narayanan has set the context and done half my job for the talk itself. When we sort of co-conceived Raising Learners for India 2040, the idea that we all had, or at least I had, was we're going to have a picnic in Palava and sort of, blow away all the cobwebs and think about what it is that we need to do differently about learning and ask some disruptive questions such as, are schools going to be obsolete in another 20 years? So this is where we come from, and you know Shobha and Vish very well, and you know all about the Karadi context, of course. So I would like to start by asking, because we have a lot of educators here, about your formative influences. Could you talk a little bit about your childhood, because everyone's talking about FLN and early childhood now, and we know you grew up with parents, a father who was a sculptor, artist, and a mother who's an art critic, writer, and she also published children's books. Am I right? Yes. So how was it growing up in a very rich environment?
Yeah, I mean, now when I reflect on it, I feel I was very fortunate. Whatever you grow up in, that becomes your natural environment. It's only later people say, oh, you had such a different, unconventional, or all these tags that we add to it. But for me, my father is a painter, my mother a writer, so I grew up with, going to exhibitions, to music concerts, to dance performances, and to book fairs. Because in Delhi, we used to have these World Book Fair. I don't know whether it still exists, which sadly Pragati Maidan almost gone. It does? Okay, that's good. But I remember sort of getting lost in those books and grew up with, my mother used to work in National Book Trust. So grew up with NBT and CBT, Children's Book Trust books, Russian books, they were just beautiful illustrations and with very minimal words. So that was my natural environment in terms of also the space to just think and to ask questions. And I realize we often think of, when we say I'm very privileged, we think of a financial privilege. But I feel the privilege just to be able to think and to ask questions and have the freedom to make mistakes or to explore. All of that was so part of my childhood. And now I'm a mother of an 11-year-old. So, I often feel, and sometimes we romanticize maybe our childhood and our past, but I often feel the world has changed so drastically. Are we even able to give them that environment that I got at home? And, we were always on the street, we were playing outdoors, and now it's all indoors. Of course, the last 3 years have been particularly indoors, which nobody imagined it to be. But, and also the good thing was that with my familial environment, with the home environment, it was very much in sync with the school I went to. I studied in Sardar Patel Vidyalaya, which was at that time, now it's I think fairly known, and but at that time it was looked down upon because we had till 5th grade we had Hindi. And they used to say, Acha, Hindi medium school, and Vidyalaya, and Vidyalaya song, which I still remember, was totally mocked at. But the school, the reason why I thought those years and I studied in the same school throughout was so precious was not just because of the academics, but the other environment of culture and social consciousness without any big words. Like every Friday we had something called the Friday collection. So little boxes with a, like a gullak. It was a little slit, and I remember we used to put in 10, 20 paisa, and then once a month or once every 2 months, every class got an opportunity to go to a village called Mandi Gaon, which was adopted by the school. And we would go and do Shram Daan there. So we would, sort of maybe make a library or dig the well or do some little work. So it was not just these, I mean, now I think words and ideas have taken over actions and, simple joys of life. Like we now feel that now that we've spoken about something, now that it's on the net, it's all done. It's like clicking for, change, wanting change, and you click something. I'm not undermining it. I think it has its place, and every good act must be supported and must be lauded. But that's not where it ends, especially for a child where everything is tactile. Ashaji spoke about the digital world, and everything is going to be available to us on digits, and the senses of a phone. You said that only the sight and the sound, but as a child you need to feel it in your hand. You need to know how a mud feels different, from a liquidy thing, what is gooey, what is sticky. All of those 5 senses, the smell, and and of course coupled with how you feel within, the connection between the mind and heart that we as adults keep sort of separating and saying this is mind, this is heart. They are sadly going to imbibe the vocabulary of putting things in silos, as opposed to realizing that art is not so different from science. I mean, their methods might be different, but there is an art of science and there is a science in art too. So these kind of things I feel were very much part of my childhood, where there were less isms and less theoretical knowledge, but just more inclusive way of living, more care for the plants and people and animals, and all of that I felt formed my childhood, and I'm truly, truly grateful to my parents and to the school.
Oh, that's so beautifully put, and I don't think any of us could agree more with you on that, though I think we've been sort of taken over by the digital world, and I was frightened when I saw you could actually go to a beach online.
I know.
But it might happen, it could well happen. But I'm going to sort of, because you spoke of the joys of, simple joys of life, the pandemic itself, I think, made us all go through a crucible in our own ways. What were the simple joys you discovered? I heard from Vish that you figured that you discovered a children's writer in you during the time.
Did I? No, I don't know about that. But, well, I was at home with my son. So I think my child is really, truly my biggest teacher. And, I'm an old mother in the sense all his classmates' mothers are at least 10, 15 years younger than me. So definitely to think like my child, or to think like how children do, I sometimes realize this whole thing of generation gap. I feel less of a generation gap with a 70 or an 80-year-old person, but with the younger people, because the world has changed more dramatically now than probably, or maybe we are imagining it. But so I think it was wonderful in some ways. To be honest, I didn't suffer as much in the beginning. The contradiction made me suffer more, that there were people, migrant workers were having to go back to their homes, and there was so much domestic violence had increased, people were out of jobs, and there was just sort of unknown kind of another level of pandemic that was happening outside, and the fact we were safe at home. And I was not, when you say you're stuck, but you're stuck with your child, and you're suddenly getting so much time with your child, and you are forced to almost think of new creative ways to engage. We all, all of us who are parents, we know that we are constantly having to tell our children too much of computer, too much of iPad, although we are half that. I'm totally guilty of being on the computer very often, and my child constantly tells me that, how come you are on the computer when you're telling me? And if I tell him, well, I'm working. And he's like, yeah, but it's still bad for the eyes. It's still not good to do it before you sleep. Those things don't change whether you're working or you're playing. So the one thing my parents had also done was not to say no, to find other alternatives. And I think that journey of discovering different things to do together. For instance, we made a little book which still has it. Maybe Karadi should publish it at some point as a quid pro quo. But we made a list of games because we realized as the pandemic was, like as the COVID was decreasing, of course that time we didn't know that it was coming in waves, that people would be on flights, in trains, or waiting for things, or at home. What are the things they can do just in conversation? So without any material, what are the 12 games that they could play? What are those 12 games that they could play with just pen and paper? So apart from the ones that we know, like Noughts and Crosses, or like Atlas, or whatever those games are, we started making up new games. And I think that was a lot of fun for me and my son Vihan. And he then wrote down like how you teach children games. So like instructions, how many children can play this, and this whole thing. And then we thought, okay, we are going to make little illustrations. And my father is an artist, so we thought, okay, he's going to illustrate. My brother is a designer. He's going to design the book. Vihan and I are going to write it. It hasn't found its fruition, but the journey itself was a lot of fun. And yeah, we did a lot of interesting things. We also had a lot of conversations. I think children today, I mean, my son was he's 11 and a half, almost 12 now. And through the pandemic, he's really grown between, sort of 8 and 11 is that almost transition age when you're not as little and you're sort of exposed to a lot of conversation. So we would talk about anything and everything. To the extent that, one day I was editing something and I was talking to a friend about that there should be more women in films or something, and he was much younger at that time, and he suddenly started crying, and I said, what happened? He said, you're always favoring women. What about men? I'm going to be a man one day. So I thought, oh my God, he's hearing all of this. He doesn't know what the world has been up to all these centuries, and what a coup it has been that in 2022 we are still having to talk about gender issues and how women need to be, need to have more opportunities and all of that. So slowly I started talking to him, and he couldn't understand. And I think that for me was fascinating because he didn't understand why there should be such inequality. And once I was telling a friend that, yeah, in today's 2020, it's completely crazy. I can understand if it happened 50 or 100 years ago. And he turned around and said, why do you understand 50 years ago? Why was it okay then? And I thought, wow, that's true. It's my conditioning that I'm thinking it was fine then, it's not fine now. But the fact that it was never fine. So I feel that this younger generation has a lot to us, lot to teach to us, because we are conditioned in a certain way. And while we may theoretically know a lot more, conditioning is beyond habit, it's beyond even exposure. It's things that unconsciously, subconsciously, you take from your environment, from something that you've seen, read, watched. And we forgive a lot and we tolerate a lot, or we do not understand a lot, that this generation is questioning quite instinctively. Like whether it is about LGBTQ issues, and I thought, okay, I'm going to slowly introduce, and he kind of turned around and said, so what's the big deal? It's their life. They can do what they want, right? I mean, who are we to judge it? So they have the vocabulary, they have the thought process, their exposure is much wider. So I think the biggest challenge for educators and parents is today to align ourselves, to question our own prejudices, complexities, conditioning, and to see that are we truly walking the talk? Because they are not just listening to us, they are observing us, they are seeing us, they are analyzing us, they are calling out our contradictions. And I think that is the biggest challenge, because that means we have to first work on ourselves. Sorry, that was kind of a long answer.
No, but that is a very interesting answer, because I think as educators, many of us here know that our children, especially today here we have educators from privately run institutions, and in Karadi we work with both the private segment of schools, and at the other end of the segment, even as we are speaking now, we have a team in Nandurbar working in the tribal district, working in 425 schools. Wow. Who do not even have the time to come in here for this conclave. So when we look at that and the disparity and how insulated our children are, because many of us, of course, in a very different generation, grew up on a staple of boarding, school stories from the UK. And the divide was there. But today, you co-launched the Pari series. P. Sainath is going to be here tomorrow, that Karadi Tales brought out. A series that tries to bring the margins to the center. What do you think an educator must do? You are a very aware, very conscious parent, raising a child. Now, this may not be the possibility in every other household, right? So what
But I'm struggling with it. I thought I was much more aware and much more sorted when I became a parent. I was like, I've been doing all of this work. I've been involved in educational work for a very long time. After my social work, in fact, I was with an organization, and I used to do workshops with school children and school teachers and principals, again of more sort of government school teachers and night school teachers and all of that. So, and on gender issues, but having your own child and realizing that to say things to others and to live it in every moment is not easy. And it challenges you constantly, but that's the joy of growing up with children. We are, I think, growing up with them. So, no, you brought a very, very important point, because that's something I really struggled with. I grew up in Delhi. I went to a school which was far more diverse. It was very middle class. I had we lived comfortably, but not opulently at all. We were very sort of middle classish in terms of, we didn't have nannies. My parents would take me everywhere. I've sat in my mother's office for hours. I've sat in, they would go for dinner. I would just sleep in anyone's house because they were having dinner, etc. So we grew up in different times. Now, as a working mother, and I'm a single mother for last 6 years, so therefore, my nanny or my house help, I owe everything to them, so that because of whom I'm able to work today. So my son was going in a very privileged school. Privileged here, I mean, in terms of financial, like, maybe 1% kind of a fairly elite school. It's called Ascent International. It's a good school in BKC where, 16 children to every class. Their parents' school is in Seattle, and they bring in a lot of the interesting pedagogy. It's an IB school and all of that. And the joy of math, and a subject that I totally disliked, I'm sorry, but I do blame it to a teacher. But so yes, you can ruin or bring in the joy of a subject. You know that you have that power. So, so it was a great school in terms of the academics, in terms of cultural activities, in terms of international diversity. So there was Korean and Japanese and American and German and all of that. But then I started realizing that my child is growing up in a bubble. Even though I talk about diversity, I take him to friends, in Bandra, we go in an auto, or, we may do all of these things to be rooted, but my being rooted comes from my childhood. It doesn't come from all big words. It came from the fact that every summer holidays, my father is from Odisha, in a small town which was smaller then. Now all towns have become bigger comparatively. And my mother was from Bombay, and South Bombay, near Metro Cinema. So Bombay was this big city. Mumbai, sorry if anybody takes offense. But Mumbai was a big city then, and this Odisha was really small. And every summer holiday, without fail, I went to stay 1 month in Odisha and 1 month in Mumbai. And the contrast of it was amazing, because there the toilet was really outside. You had to take a bath near the well, which as kids we loved it. We had a little pond. We would go and catch fish there, and we celebrated all the festivals. And then we came to, this South Bombay place where, it was fancier than that. They had a TV, which we didn't have TV. In Delhi at home, my father didn't want a television for almost 8 years. I don't have a television for last 6 years. So, and in fact, that has been also great. Talking of the earlier answer of, living in COVID without television was also amazing. So So those different worlds that I straddled with, with a lot of ease, with no judgment of either of the worlds, was, I think, what taught me that today I can stay, I can travel first class and stay in a 5-star, but if I have to go in a village and sleep in a chatai, and I'll be totally fine in both places. But I'm not able to give that world to my child, because he goes in a car to his school, the AC rooms, AC corridors. What am I telling him about environment? Like, how do I explain to him that you yourself and we are all culpable for this climate change? And that's why it was a difficult decision, because, we are very close, and especially in these last 3 years of being together, I put him in a residential school called Sahyadri, which I'm actually quite happy about now. It's a J. Krishnamurti school, if some of you have heard of Rishi Valley. It's a sister concern of that. It's near Pune, and it's very, very diverse. Children come from all different parts of the country. They have different accents, they have different skin tone, they look different, they talk different, they bring different experiences. And I think, without me having to tell him about diversity and inclusion and all of that, he's experiencing it. He's experiencing the good and the bad of being in a boarding school, the difficulties of the challenges from a fairly protective environment to having to do on his own. But the way he's fitted in, his teachers were telling me in the first month that we are really surprised that he's very comfortable. He's kind of become part of the school very quickly. And as parents, as teachers, we can't really take too much credit, because I think each child is different, and what they learn and what they absorb is so much to also do with their own. But we want to believe that if nurture even has 5% contribution, for us that's 100%, and we want to do the best we can.
On that note, I'm going to open the floor to a few questions.
Sure.
If time permits, we'll also keep a tab on the time. Would some of you like
Short
to ask
questions,
Ms. Nandita?
and sadly maybe slightly longer answers, because thoughts are so connected and slightly meandering. Yes,
it's so fluid and beautifully free-flowing. Yes. Could someone take a mic to...
Yeah, that's true.
But you're being live streamed. We can't capture you. So.
Yeah, that's a good idea. As a parent, he asked, as a parent and as an actor, what are the difficult topics that you find? Well, they're slightly different. I would use them, I would talk about them differently in terms of, as a parent, I know that before my child was born, I was most worried about the fact that how am I going to explain to him the disparity that exists and how we have normalized it. When another child is going to knock at my car window, and what am I going to do? For a very long time, much before my child was even thought of, whenever, I've always been very unsure. That's one subject that I haven't fully sorted in my head, because otherwise, at least theoretically, things are somewhat in place. That what do you do when a beggar comes outside your window? Do you give it? Do you give, or do you not? And I kind of swing. Sometimes if I feel that this is genuine, I give. Sometimes I feel that no, this might be part of a racket and I might be adding to the problem, then I don't. And so you go with your instinct. But I was very worried that how am I going to answer these questions? And not just the disparity, but the fact that we have normalized it, and the fact that we are on the other end of the spectrum. And when he was really small, he would ask those questions, and we would have these long conversations. What was worrying for me that as he grew older, he started normalizing too. He started realizing this is the reality, and this is how it works, that our house help doesn't sit with us at the dining table and eats then. But then he also saw that yes, the house help can still sit on the sofa, on the bed. If she's, let's say, putting oil on my son's head, she doesn't have to sit on the floor, that she can sit. So he was figuring it out that yes, there are some disparities, but some things maybe are slightly better than other houses that I go to. He's processing things on his own, and through that, sometimes asking me these questions. And we argue sometimes because I come up with my pat answer and then he questions that answer and then, and then you say, you're actually right, let me think about it. I don't know why we do that, yeah. And then, that's what triggers that, and that helps a child also to go deeper into things, to analyze not just from the mind, but from the heart and, from the, and you're honing an instinct. When we say it's my gut feeling or it's my instinct, what do we really mean? I don't think there's just an instinct in the air. That instinct also has to be honed and has to be nurtured and has to be worked on for it to become your instinct. Absolutely. In terms of an actor, I think from his childhood he's seen some amount of media glare and me going here or things that come in the newspaper, or sometimes people just walk up to you and talk with such familiarity, and then he would say, do you know her? And I was like, no. He's like, but why is she saying that? Or sometimes I'm in the middle of something and we were in Kashmir and one lady said, you look so much like Nandita Das. And I said, yeah, I've been told. And I usually try not to smile because if I smile, it kind of gives away. So I said, yeah, I've been told, but I'm not. And my son looked at me and then he said, that was a lie. So I said it was a joke and we are in a hurry. He said a joke is when you tell the person after that the truth. It's a lie because you didn't tell her and she's gone away. I'm going to go and tell her. I'm like, are you crazy? And he ran to her and he said, yes, she is. Now, whether he did it out of a certain level of, pride or certain, to put me in my place or to have fun. But so we have those moments and we talk about it because, so someone came and told me about a film that I really don't like and said, oh, I saw that film and you were lovely. And I said, no, it wasn't a great film and I wasn't so good. So, my son sort of looked at me and said, why do you say that? I said, yeah, it's the truth. Sometimes they don't really know my work. Just because I'm in the media, they think they should, they come and shower some amount of whatever, praise. So I said, you have to take it with a pinch of salt. And he's seen other aspects of my life, so I think he kind of balances that out. We as grown-ups also have a need to share and to tell and to give answers. And you can sometimes have low self-esteem because you feel like, oh, I thought I was doing it right and I'm not doing it right. Sometimes we burden our children with a decision. They don't want to decide. Also, there is so much negativity on television. Somehow we can, have an education system or a familial environment where we say you love what you do and you do what you love.